how is it that we could be in a 17-year bull run, and yet feel so pessimistic?
What is financial freedom?
Human nature is to build and contribute. And I believe that if we are only consuming and not creating, that does lead to distress. It does lead to loneliness. There are a lot of people who, in their early life, they get into the wrong career. And by wrong, I mean misaligned, is that it gives you the leeway to pursue what is actually your calling. Where, let's say you have a child who becomes very, very sick.
Welcome back to the You Potential Podcast. Today, my guest is Paula Pant. She's a trained journalist, a familiar face in Netflix documentary Get Smart with Money, and the host of one of the most respected personal finance podcasts around, with over 45 million downloads. She's also traveled to over 40 countries, built the financial independence movement from the ground up, and has been changing how people think about their money and freedom ever since. Before we get into this episode, if you've been enjoying the You Potential Podcast, please subscribe right here on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. While you're at it, leave us a review. It certainly helps. And now, I hope you enjoy this fascinating conversation with Paula Pant. Paula Pant, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm looking forward to this. I have heard your voice many times in my earbuds, and it's a pleasure to sit here and get to ask questions and have that voice respond directly to me. So thank you.
Of course, of course.
I thought we could only start in one place. I
Mhm.
understand that you have Tazzy, Azra, and a turtle named Jeffrey.
Joffrey, yeah,
Joffrey,
nice.
okay. What do they know about Paula that your listeners just don't know?
Wow, what a wonderful question. I am a bit of a sucker for animal rescue. So all of them are rescues. Joffrey in particular, he got his name because he's my turtle, and I pulled him out of a swimming pool, which
Oh,
turtles should never ever go into a swimming pool. The chlorine can kill them. And if the chlorine doesn't kill them, then they'll eventually get trapped in the filter, right? And
yeeks.
so, um, I was in South Carolina, and I was looking at the swimming pool, this outdoor pool at the hotel, and it was clear that this baby hatchling, he was obviously like a day old. It was clear that he had somehow gotten separated from his little hatchling family and had fallen into the pool. And I didn't know how long he had been in there. And I thought that there was a decent chance that he might die of chlorine exposure within the next day or two. And so what I'm about to say next is a Game of Thrones spoiler. So if you don't want a spoiler, plug your ears for the next 20 seconds. But so the reason I named him Joffrey is because in the event that he died of poisoning, it would not be quite so tragic. So for Game of Thrones fans out there, you guys will get that reference. But he didn't die of poisoning. He remained, and that was 10 years ago. And
Ah,
so ever since, I have had a turtle named after the Game of Thrones villain.
that is fantastic. At 10 years old, he's a resilient guy. Is he one of these turtles that can live for like a long,
40
long time?
years, yeah,
40 years, okay.
yeah, he's a yellow belly slider. So in captivity, they live 30 to 40 years. So he's, you know, he's gonna be with me for the long haul. That's the other thing my animals know about me. Not only am I a sucker for animal rescue, but once you're in your family,
Ah,
there is no matter how inconvenient it gets, and it was very inconvenient moving him from South Carolina to Georgia to Las Vegas to New York. But he has come with me every step of the way.
wow, yeah, he is a resilient guy flying all over the country.
Yeah, yeah.
You say there's a lesson here. Once you're in, you're in. A
Mhm.
lot of this podcast, we dance in and out of money or relationships with money, what makes a good life. But many, many studies talk about this idea of once we're in our the family and our relationships really help cultivate this sense of a good life. This with your animals and so forth. How important are relationships for you when you think about what makes a good life for Paula?
Oh, relationships are paramount, and there's research that backs this. That Harvard did this longitudinal study on um, looking at a cohort of people across, I believe that it was a span of around 80 years, to see what correlated with happiness. And what they found was that the number one predictor of long-term happiness were the quality of a person's relationships. So being surrounded by people that you love and trust, whether that's family, whether that's friends, or whether that's the broader community, having that network of strong relationships is the number one determinant of a person's long-term happiness and by extension their health. You look at blue zones around the world, you look at these
Mhm.
areas where they have super agers, people who in aggregate tend to live longer than the average human. And they say, what contributes to that lifespan? There are these pockets of superagers in different parts of the world. So there's a pocket in Japan, there's a pocket in California. You've got these different pockets in different areas. So diet is inconsistent, right? The people in Japan who are the superagers, they eat healthy food, but it's a different type of food. It's a different composition, different macros of food than this particular. It was specifically a highly religious community, an enclave that was a very highly religious community in California. I forget the religion. Maybe Seventh Day Adventist. I would have to look that up. But so there's that one particular very religious enclave. They also had a population of superagers, and there were a few other scattered areas around the world. These areas all had pockets of superagers, um, but nutrition was not a constant. Exercise habits were not a constant. Like all of these things were done well, but they were all variables. And so if you look across these superagers and ask what are the constants that other than the fact that they don't smoke cigarettes, the primary constant was strong relationships, very, very strong community.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Hey, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I wanna get into the meat and potatoes of your work, but I think as I seen your work, you're more than just a spreadsheet. And I really do think having these conversations about the important things that create this life well lived, like our relationships, are important so we know how to spend our time. Um, when when you first started Afford Anything, but not
Mhm.
everything,
Yeah.
what was your frame in terms of how you were thinking about wealth as a holistic term, not just money?
It has really evolved. So I've been running Afford Anything for 15 years. It started as a blog in
Congratulations.
2011. Thank you. Thank you. Um, yeah, in 2011, it began as a blog. And the genesis was that I had been working as a newspaper reporter. During the time that I was a news reporter, I was also freelancing during the evenings and weekends. Over the span of 3 years, I saved up $25,000. Once I had 25,000, I quit my job, bought a one-way plane ticket to Egypt, and for the next 27 months, so 2 years and change, I lived out of a backpack and freelanced a little bit here and there for some pocket change, but by and large, just went to countries where the dollar exchange rate really worked in my favor. Um, and lived out of a backpack for the next 2 years and traveled. And when people heard that, my friends, they constantly said the same thing. They had the same refrain, which is, "I would love to do that, but I can't afford it." And
Um,
yet I knew that these were people who earned more than I did, but they also lived in apartments that had stainless steel appliances. They would spend $12 or $14 on a cocktail at a bar, right? They would do all of these things that frittered their money away, and it's fine if they wanted to consciously make the choice that they value that more than they value travel. That's a very different statement. That's not the statement of "I can't afford it." That's the statement of, "Oh, I considered travel, but when I weighed it against, um, the apartment that I live in and the weekends, that I have, I decided that my my local lifestyle was more important than travel," right? That's not the statement of I can't afford it. That was the statement of I weighed the options and I've chosen differently. That is a wonderful statement. So
Mm.
I throw no shade to people who weigh the options and choose X or Y or Z intentionally. But that was not what people said. What people said was, I can't afford it. And so I started to afford anything initially to convey the message that you can afford anything, but you can't afford everything. And so if you really want to travel, if that's what you choose, you'll move heaven and earth to make that happen. You know, when I was traveling, I wasn't drinking alcohol, not because I am against it, not because I don't like it, because I just didn't have the money. Beer is expensive. And I was living on a very tight budget, and I just didn't have the money to drink. So I didn't. Um, that was a choice. Like, that was a trade-off that I made to be able to travel. Uh, and so, you know, that was the origin of Afford Anything, and it has morphed since then. So in the beginning, it was all about opportunity cost and travel and freedom and escaping the 9 to 5 and living life on your own terms. And over the span of 15 years, it has morphed into um, intentional decision making, n nuanced thinking, having clear mental models, having clear frameworks. Um, it's really metacognition. It's thinking about how to think
Mm.
told through the lens of money.
Mm.
And when I say told through the lens of money, on Afford Anything on the podcast, we talk about 5 pillars: financial psychology, increasing your income, investing, real estate, and entrepreneurship. So the acronym is FIRE with 2 I's, double I FIRE. But those 5 pillars form the basis of the conversation about money, which is really a conversation about how to think.
Whoa. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. As you're telling this story and you start with financial psychology,
Mhm.
an area that do enjoy to tread around. I was enjoying preparing for today, and I learned that you have, I would say, perhaps two different lenses how you would have seen money growing up, one from Nepalese lens and then one from American lens. I'm wondering, as you reflect back onto your upbringing, how did both of these cultures inform how you thought and felt about money?
Hmm, it's a good question. So I was born in Kathmandu, Nepal, came to the United States as a baby. I've gone back to Nepal 9 times. I've cumulatively spent about 2 years of my life there, but spread out across 9 visits. Um, and my family very much lived in like a little Nepalese bubble. Um, and inside of that bubble, that social bubble, uh, the the drive was not it wasn't happiness, it was survival. And
Mhm.
so people never said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And people in the broader Nepalese community, when I was a kid, they never said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Because nobody really cared about what you wanted. People said, "Are you going to be a doctor or an engineer?"
Mm.
Because they were looking for security, and they knew that being a doctor or being an engineer, those were 2 viable paths that, in their eyes, would get you a secure, well-paying job so that you could pay your bills and support your family. Those are also jobs that are likely to get H-1B visas. So, it's like the parents came over with across the community, parents often came over with those jobs in mind, and then that was what got passed down to the kids in the community. Um, and so growing up with that mindset, like, are you going to be a doctor or an engineer? It was very much you know, your academics are of utmost importance. Uh, Masters is minimum. Like there was a huge reverence for high quality academics that leads to professional work. Um, And there was really no thought around entrepreneurship, around social skills, around athletic skills, around what people would today refer to as looks maxing. Um,
Well,
you
I've
know,
never heard this term, "book smacking."
Oh, basically, it's the idea that your appearance also plays a role in your level of success. And
Oh,
so if
okay.
you want to be successful, you need to be attractive. That's part of the job. But those types of things, those more social skills, were not really part of the equation. How I grew up, I grew up with the you go to school, you take your exams, you get the best possible score in your exam, and you go to engineering school or med school, and that's the path. Very linear. Um, and I think that took a while to unlearn because um, when I look back on my life, I think there was a lot of value. The job that I got at McDonald's at the age of 15 taught me systems and operations and
Mm.
processes just by virtue of working the drive-through of McDonald's for minimum wage and seeing from the inside how tightly managed, those systems and processes and operations are. I mean, down to, you know, the number of slices of cheese that you put on the cheeseburger and the way that those slices of cheese should be, laid. You put one slice like this and the other like that. Like every detail of every process was, there were standard operating procedures. And seeing that by working at the drive-through of McDonald's, like those are lessons I think about today as a business owner and as an entrepreneur. And I don't think uh my parents would have ever um recognized that a job like that would have had that kind of value.
I'm not sure how many 14-year-olds were noticing the systems operations at McDonald's, but you seem like quite the curious individual. So I'm sure your parents were proud you were noticing those things. As you're framing with your parents coming over from Nepal and perhaps their perspective on what masters at the minimum, doctor, accountant, these roles,
Mhm.
you could see how that desire for stability coming from perhaps somewhere unstable, a country that maybe they felt instability and then coming to America and trying to get their ground secure, that those thoughts for their child to get some security would be important.
Mhm.
What did they think when you told them that you were quitting your first job or your journalism job to take that flight to Egypt?
Oh, they hated it. Absolutely hated it. Yeah, hated every second of it. Um, and that was one thing, that was a battle that I had to fight throughout my 20s. Um, like They hated the idea of long-term travel. They hated that when I came back, I didn't go directly to grad school. That was a huge point of contention, because they constantly harped on how my education was incomplete. And every single conversation, they reminded me, "Your education is incomplete. Your education is incomplete." That continued, into my early to mid 30s. Your education's incomplete. Um, and and when I decided I was going to start my own company, start my own brand, um, there was never any support for it until it became successful. And
Mm.
then once it became successful, then the proof is in the pudding. But there would have been no convincing them in advance, right? It had to be born of results, not born of persuasion.
So it really fascinates me just hearing your story and these untold stories that to the naked eye, someone listening to your podcast, at least for myself, wouldn't have known this maybe unspoken tension that this is only going to succeed, or I only see this as succeeding from parents' view until it's actually succeeding.
Right.
You're at, I don't how many million, 40 millions. You have a
Uh, about
Netflix,
about 45 million downloads on the
45
Afford Anything
million
podcast.
downloads,
Yeah.
15 years working
Yeah.
with Netflix. Safe to say it's going well. Where did that resilience come from? And were there moments where you're just like, oh, mom and dad want me to succeed. I'm not succeeding in the early days. Were there
Mhm.
moments where you thought about going to become an accountant or a doctor?
Yeah, there were times when I wondered if I should go get a 9 to 5 job. Um, you know, uh, in I had been a newspaper reporter, so there were moments when I thought maybe I should go back into the 9 to 5 of the media world.
Hmm.
But I also could see that, if I had lived in the 1950s or 60s, right? If I had lived at a time when media was thriving, um, print newspapers in particular, I probably would have stayed in print newspapers for my whole life. But it was obvious at that time that print newspapers were collapsing as an industry. Craigslist came about and decimated classified ad revenue. Prior to Craigslist, um, for many papers, up to 25% of their revenue was classified ads. And in, one website, one very popular website came up, and suddenly classified ad revenue dried up. Everything from rental listings to found pets, like, remember, all of that used to be done through the classified section
Hmm.
for those of us who are old enough to remember that. Um, and so when that went away, it caused a lot of newspapers folded and a lot of others had big layoffs or went on hiring freezes. And then m- more pressures on the newspaper industry just continued to compound. Suddenly people were getting their news from the internet rather than from print media, and that meant that the ad model of, you know, selling column inches of ads that would run in a print medium, that whole ad model started to weaken, and suddenly every print ad was fetching fewer and fewer dollars, and the revenue from digital ads wasn't it just didn't compare. Um, and so it was clear that if I wanted to stay in the world of media, newspapers was my background, um, that the old structure just wasn't the way to do it anymore. So part of it
Hmm.
was, uh, I think part of what fueled me during the early days was a recognition that I understood something about the world that the my parents' generation didn't. And that something, as many this is something I think probably most millennials will be able to relate to. That's something that we all understood when we were in our early 20s, was that the new world would be digital.
Hmm.
And I think as millennials, we were young enough to be, we were young enough to embrace it in a way that the baby boomers and Gen X were slower to adapt. And that, I think, gave millennials in particular a competitive edge in those mediums.
I wrote that down. I understood something my parents' generation didn't. And my brain can't help but think, when your father decided to move to America, perhaps he understood something that the
Mhm.
previous generations in Nepal, or this could be go for any immigrant story, that they didn't understand. Because I'm sure people were like, "What? You're going?" My family's from
Yeah.
Ukraine. Like, you're going to Canada, um,
Right.
and yet you're doing the same thing here.
Mhm.
You're taking a risk. You're not taking the accounting job, the doctor job that has that stability, but you understood something that perhaps he didn't. But just reading online, it sounds like he was quite the hard worker. If
Mhm.
the internet is correct, if he was
Yeah.
illiterate and had to learn to read at
Mhm.
middle 30s, went back to grade school, I believe. Um, and it seems like he passed these really good traits on to you to take a risk as he did to move to America, and you're starting your own company. And now you're impacting 45 million people on this podcast. What's it like
Yeah.
to think that, hey, a lot of these skills, I borrowed from my parents and I'm just making them blossom even more?
Yeah, yeah. So my grandparents were illiterate. My dad's parents, they were both functionally illiterate. My
Okay.
grandfather was a tenant farmer. So he was a farmer on somebody else's land. He didn't own any land of his own. My grandmother she was 8 years old when she married him. Um, he was 14, she was 8 when they got married. It was an arranged marriage. My own parents, my mom was 13 and my dad was 14. So
Mm.
I'm the first in my direct lineage to not be a child bride. Um, and so yeah, it's very old school, where I came from. Um, but you're right, the only way to pull out of that is by being very resourceful by taking risks, by working super hard. Um, I think, those qualities or attributes I certainly got from my father. It was just I guess there's a distinction between, qualities or attributes such as hard work, drive, determination, risk taking. That is distinct from overlaying the f- the mental model that you have of how the world operates.
Hmm.
And so he came from a mental model um, that was very, uh, Nepal doesn't have a consumer economy in the way that the United States does. Like the United States has a large part of our economic system is driven by consumer spending. So you've got this thriving middle class, and the middle class buys dishwashers and washer and dryer and chairs and pillows and all of that creates jobs. And it creates this big middle section of jobs so that you can be an entrepreneur and be very successful here. And Nepal doesn't really have an economy like that. There's a tourism, there's an agriculture, there's farming and there's tourism, and that's about it. Um, and particularly when he was young. And in fact, when he was young, tourism wasn't really even developed. Um, and so in that model, you basically had you basically were either poor or you were a doctor. I mean, those are like kind of your choices.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You were either poor or you were extremely highly educated, or maybe you were a priest. I mean, that would be another option, but there wasn't a whole lot of choice. And the way that you would, um, if you were lucky, you could go to boarding school in India and, maybe get a job like, uh, you know, get an esteemed position. And so he was operating from that mental model. He was operating from this
Mm-hmm.
framework of this is how the world works. And that doesn't map. It doesn't map to US society or North American society. B, it also doesn't map to the internet era when the barriers to entry like, evaporated. Pre-internet, if you wanted to be an entrepreneur, you did need a brick and mortar establishment for the most part. I mean, I'm not aware there might be some maybe you could be a travel agent and you could do that through the phone. Um, there might have been some, like, teleworking jobs, I guess, but for the most part, there were high costs of capital if you wanted to start your own business. And that is no longer when the internet came about, that no longer became the case. Um, and what that meant is that, the barriers to entry diminished. It became easier than ever to start your own thing, and that was something that I, as a millennial, understood that he hadn't quite internalized,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But I wasn't gonna let his because I had those qualities and those attributes that I'd learned from him, I wasn't going to let his outdated model of the way the world operates influence my decision making and influence me into making the suboptimal decision.
I appreciate that. And, sometimes what you're saying is referred to like impartial truth. So this
Mhm.
was true at a certain point in time. And it's often applied to money stories is that, you can't trust the bank because in my great
Mm,
great grandfather's case, you can't trust the bank because they could just take the money or they could go insolvent. And then fast forward 50 years later, they're still saving under a mattress. So
right,
these
right,
impartial truths, they're often passed down to us. And I appreciate you sharing how you've unraveled some of that, but still took those enduring qualities that your father has given you. I'm
right.
curious, as you taking this risk, and I've read online that you said, I believe, if the internet's true, that the afford anything is still one of the biggest risks. So you're entrepreneur, you're running a company of employees. Whether it was downloads or people that you're influencing, was there a point in time where you're like, okay, I'm doing it. It's not going to break tomorrow.
Yeah. I think it was when I hired my first employee, and that was
Yeah.
roughly about 2017. I had prior to that, I'd worked with 1099 contractors. Um, but when you're working only with 1099 contractors, you're not you are not solely and uniquely responsible for their paycheck. Versus when
Hmm.
you've got a full-time W-2 employee, you are their only source of income. And, and it has to be consistent income. Um, and there is a level of responsibility, especially when you hire somebody and you know that your employee has a family that they're supporting with that income. Like, there is such a level of responsibility there, um, that I think that was for me, the moment when I was like, "Wow, this I have just made the shift from being self-employed to being an entrepreneur." And that I think was an essential shift because, um, initially I had conflated those 2 ideas, but they are very different.
Hi, it's Sean. I know I'm breaking into the conversation just for a moment. There's good reason. If you're here, it means you care about living with more purpose, more meaning, and deeper connection. And that's exactly what the You Potential podcast is all about. When you hit that subscribe button, conversations like this, the ones that challenge you to think differently and open to new possibilities, keep showing up to you every week. And when you share this episode with someone you care, you're not just passing along a podcast. You're giving them a chance to reflect, to grow, and maybe even to reimagine what a good life can look like for them. So please take a second, subscribe, share it with a friend. Let's spread the conversations that truly matter. Now back to the show. Yeah. I want to switch over to freedom.
Mhm.
I and freedom and enough. I I've read some things that you've written about freedom and what is enough. Let's start with freedom first. What is financial freedom? I know this is a
Mm,
term that,
yeah.
I mean, in the FI community, everywhere, financial freedom can be a surface level conversation, but I see and hear you about it from a different lens. So, what is financial freedom? Let's start there.
Mm. So I believe that financial freedom, which I use that term interchangeably with financial independence,
Hmm.
and so I think that that is defined as the point at which your potential passive or residual income, typically but not always through investments, is enough for at least basic human decency, right? For a basic decent standard of living. And so I want to kind of unpack what I mean by that. So first of
Hmm.
all, when I say your potential passive income or your potential residual income, what I mean by that is you're not necessarily realizing those gains. You might have a bunch of money that you're just reinvesting, whether that's rental properties where you are just taking all of the free cash flow and reinvesting it back into building out your rental portfolio, or maybe you've got index funds in a brokerage account and you're reinvesting all of the dividends and capital gains. Um, so when I say your potential passive income, I say that because there's a subset of people who believe that you need to literally realize those gains, that check needs to hit your bank account, or that the deposit needs to hit your bank account in order for you to have financial freedom. No, no, no. It needs to be possible. That doesn't mean that you are obligated to realize those gains, right? And realizing those gains also has tax implications, right? So you might not want to do that, but that's a choice. Uh,
Hmm.
so that's what I mean when I say your potential passive income. And when I say passive income, I'm using that interchangeably with the term residual income because sometimes passive can be a loaded word. And so I find that a lot of people, they get really caught up in the semantic of, well, nothing's really passive. So let's bypass that. Let's say residual income, if that makes people um, better with the idea. Okay, so your potential residual income, and this primarily tends to happen through investments. It doesn't have to. For some people, this might be residuals that you get from a piece of software that you wrote, or I mean, if there are musicians who wrote songs 20 years ago and they're still getting residuals from that. Um, there are the cast of Friends still gets residuals from, having acted in Friends, right? So certainly there are many people who get residuals in ways that are not market investments. Um, but your potential residual income, typically through investments for the average person, but not always, is and then the final part of the definition is enough. And when I say enough, I mean enough for just a basic living standard. Some people might refer to this as lean fi. So it's got to be enough that you can live in a warm and safe environment. You can put food on the table. You can keep the lights on. You can pay the water and sewer bill and the electric bill. You can run heat in the winter and air conditioning in the summer. Like it's got to be enough that you can just live a basic, decent standard of living. It doesn't need to be. Uh, it doesn't need to pay for five three-star Michelin restaurants and fancy vacations. And maybe you want that in your life. That's cool. That's optional. You can, if you want to, you can work harder to achieve that. But the reason that I define financial freedom as the point at which you can at least support a decent living standard is because if you are in an emergency situation where, let's say, you have a child who becomes very, very sick, and you decide that you want to quit your job so you can spend every single day at the hospital with your kid, right? You're not at that moment, you're not going to care about
Mm.
restaurants or vacations or nice clothes, that need dry cleaning. You're not going to care about any of that. That's all out the window. You just need a basic, decent human standard of living. Um, Same thing if you have a parent, an elderly parent who gets dementia and you need to be by their side. If you have a sibling who gets cancer, I know I'm highlighting all of these black swan events, but really
Mhm.
that's what financial freedom in large part is for. It is that safety net so that if there is a black swan event, you you can narrow your focus to only the thing that is most important and let everything else go, and you know that your bills are going to be taken care of. And it might
Yeah.
not be the way that you prefer to live forever, but
Mhm.
but it provides that safety net that carries you through those black swan moments.
People often say, "Does money buy happiness? Can it?" In the events that you're talking about, money 100% can curb financial distress, can create
Mhm.
options that we can then experience health,
Yeah,
et cetera. So
yeah.
I,
For
you were gonna
for
say something?
people who ask, "Can money buy happiness?" I always say a lack of money can lead to unhappiness.
Yes, absolutely. Now, so I love this idea of residual. Passive
Mhm.
does have a connotation to it. Residual income that could provide enough. I like this idea. Enough money is what I understand, and then it can provide some buffers against the distress moments in our lives. How about enough inside? This idea of if we take it like this is the money side of it. How about for Paula? What is having enough or satisfaction with our money? What does that feel like inside of you?
I think I mean, satisfaction with money is being able to cover most of the things that you want without really having to think about it. You know, if
Mhm.
if um if a friend of mine were to text me right now and say, "Hey, let's try there's a new Thai food restaurant down the street. Let's go." Um I don't have to check my bank account. Like I
Mhm.
know that I can just do it. So, if I decide that I want to, and I'm not talking about anything particularly excessive, but like just in the span of living a normal, you know, uh, regular everyday life, like if you can get through if I can pull a turtle out of a swimming pool and never think about, all right, well, I'm going to have to get a tank and then I'm going to get a filter. And then I'm probably going to need somebody who can come by at least once a quarter to like do a filter change out. Um, and so now I've got all of this tank maintenance and filter maintenance and all of that carries a cost, right? when I pulled my pet turtle out of that swimming pool, I didn't think about that. I could just rescue a turtle, not think about the cost, and absorb that cost over the next 40 years that
40
that
years.
that I'm gonna have this turtle, you know?
I like this metaphor. Financial freedom inside is being able to rescue a turtle and being
Yes,
okay with
yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Um,
being able to rescue a turtle without thinking about it.
and I asked this, I'm dancing around this question out of my own curiosity. I know you spend a lot of time in the financial independent community, or the FIRE
Yeah.
community, financial independent, retire early. I think it was a movement that was really, really strong in terms of taking a risk, creating a different narrative than the 9 to 5 work till you're 65.
Mhm.
Whether it's in, I don't want to have a Susie Orman moment here. Whether that's in the FIRE movement or any, my background as a financial planner, I see it with clients all the time.
Mm.
Do you experience that we can have enough residual assets to cover our expenses, or investable assets, or real estate, whatever our asset class is, but still feel this emptiness and hollowness inside?
Yes, I mean, I think that the human nature is to build and contribute. Human nature is to be productive in some form. And I believe that if we are only consuming and not creating,
Mhm.
that does lead to distress. It does lead to loneliness. Now, what does it mean to build or to create or to be productive? Um, that depends on the individual. I very much believe that every individual has a calling, and nobody else can tell you what that calling is. Not society, not, just no one can tell you what that is. That's something that really only comes from the quietest parts of you. We know from research that there are 3 attributes that tend to correlate to a person's satisfaction in the workplace, and those are mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So for each person, whatever you do, you need to feel as though you have those 3 things, that you, can obtain mastery in a given domain, that you have some degree of autonomy within the day-to-day of how you work, and that there is a purpose behind the work that you do. Beyond that, the calling that you have could be in any domain. I mean, for some people, it's being a financial planner. For some people, it's being a full time parent. For some people, it's being a full time reptile rescue, you know? But I think there are a lot of people, and this sort of goes back to the whole, are you going to be a doctor or an engineer? I think there are a lot of people who, in their early life, they get into the wrong career. And by wrong, I mean misaligned. They
Mm.
get into a career that is misaligned with their purpose because they think that it will provide monetary reward. And it does, but they dislike their career because their career is not their calling. And I think that one of the values, the benefits of financial freedom or financial independence is that it gives you the leeway to pursue what is actually your calling. And it might be the case that your calling is something that is significantly lower paying. It might be that you're a software engineer, but what really lights you up is being a preschool teacher, right? And if,
Mhm.
that's going to require a huge step down in pay. So if you're going to do that, why not do a very well funded version of that? And you don't necessarily have to have full financial independence. That's not I don't believe that financial independence is a binary, which is how it's often portrayed. Um, I think that if you're even, heck, 50% of the way towards financial independence, and you want to make a very well-funded career change from software engineer to preschool teacher, or vice versa. Maybe you're a preschool teacher, but you've always wanted to be a software engineer. But in order to do that, now you've got to go back to school. And that means that you have the opportunity cost of removing yourself from the paid workforce for X number of years while you're back in school, right? Like that can move both ways. Either way, there's going to be a financial hit that's associated with it. And the pursuit of financial independence, um, not the achievement of it, but the pursuit of it
Mm.
can give you a buffer that can allow you to align the work that you do with your true calling.
that last part really spoke to me. Like I said, I think the fire movement was great. Started a whole new conversation we needed.
Mhm.
I think some people got confused with the arrival of that goal was the
Mm,
purpose and not the pursuit, like you eloquently just described. There's something in psychology called the arrival fallacy that we have this
mm.
goal, this vision that when we arrive, it's going to be blissful, like the rain or land before time. What did they call? I forget what they were on a mission to get somewhere in land before time. I can't remember what it's called, but anyways, um, when you talk to people in your community,
Mhm.
how many of them are thinking about this like arrival at this goal versus I feel like the conversation's shifting towards exactly what you said, the pursuit.
Yeah, I hope it does. I hope it shifts towards that more because I do,
I
anecdotally at
feel like
least,
you're
I
leading that conversation lately.
oh, well, thank you, thank you. I hope I am because I do think that there are a lot of people who really get hung up on the goal. And if you think about it, the goal can be incredibly arbitrary. First of all, the way that most people set a financial independence goal is they set a goal that is um, typically a multiple of their current spending. So, for example, you might set a goal that is 25 times your current spending, because with that goal, then using the 4% rule of thumb, you can draw down 4%. If you save a portfolio, it's valued at 25x your current spending, then you can draw down at 4% per year, 4% in the first year, and then 4% adjusted for inflation every subsequent year. And, you know, stand a decent chance of not outliving your money. But the flaw with that is um, that goal, 25x, is a goal based on a point in time, like data set, right?
Mm,
Your current spending at the time that you set that goal is simply one data point of what is an extremely volatile graph. I mean, if you think about the way that any of us spend money, nobody spends precisely the same amount of money every single month, right? Our expenses are variable. Even people who um, say, "Oh, I don't have a lot of discretionary spending. I I don't need a lot of discretionary spending." Yeah, but your healthcare expenses are variable. Your I mean, just there's natural variation, both at a month to month basis and then zooming out a year to year basis. And then when you go to decades, when you take the decades view, you're going to get a lot of variation. Like the amount of health and travel and experience that you're likely to have in your 40s or 50s is going to look very different than in your 80s or 90s. Um, People often talk about what their retirement spending smirk, where like spending tends to go up and then it
mhm,
drops down, and then towards the end of your life it kind of ticks back up again because you've got end of life care needs. So the graph is shaped a little bit like a smirk, but um, all of that is to say, there's a bit of a tangent that linking a goal to a point in time singular data point just doesn't make any sense. And so even if you are chasing this very binary version of I need to hit a given number, that number itself is flawed. That number
mhm,
itself is dynamic.
mhm. And even when you hit it, then you just hit it.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
everything's orientated towards this like this number, then you hit it. Then what? I
you're
mean,
right.
people win Oscars and they think it's going to be the best thing. I can't recall who many people have said, and they get it, and it's like, okay, 2 days after the parties, it's back to life.
Right. Yeah, 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 exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, and is your life meaningfully different between when your net worth was 95% of your goal versus when your net worth is like 102% of your goal? Uh, I mean, net worth is kind of a number on a piece of paper. You don't really
Mm.
it's not part of your lived experience, unless you're actively living on only distributions.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been asking you questions, but
Yeah,
I, um,
yeah.
y- I can't recall online. It said somewhere you hit your own FI number early in your 30s. Has it been meaningfully different since you hit that in how you experience life?
I think there is a quiet confidence that comes from
Mm,
knowing, From knowing that I have this net worth, it doesn't change my day-to-day life. Like, at the day-to-day level, I'm um, still like, my life hasn't really meaningfully changed in any
Hmm.
particular way. Um, I do think that there is some very you read these news articles about how a lot like, Gen Z is disillusioned because they feel like they'll never get ahead.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that is largely due to the fact that by and large, don't own assets. In fact, this is something I think about a lot. There's right now, there's this disconnect between consumer sentiment and, economic performance, because objectively, we in the US, we've had strong economic performance for the last several years. The S&P 500 has had double-digit gains for the last 3 consecutive years. Um, the housing market is up now, I think it's something like 45 or 50% as compared to where it was in 2019. And in one single year, from 2020 to 2021, in that 1 year alone, housing values jumped 17%. And so if you own assets, if you purchased a home p 2019 or prior, um, if you purchased stocks 2020 or prior, or heck, even like 2021, 2022, right? You've seen the value of your assets grow. And I think when I think about the disconnect between consumer sentiment and economic performance, how could it be that we are in a bull market, where there's plenty of reason to continue to be bullish? You know, we have, with the exception of March of 2020, we've more or less continually been in a bull market since 2009, right? How is it that we could be in what, a 17-year bull run, um, and yet feel so pessimistic? And it's because there are some people who have benefited from the 17-year bull run, and those people are people who own assets. And then there are other people who have simply seen inflation, um, but they don't own any assets, so they haven't gotten the value of that bull run. And I think that even though the day-to-day life of both of those cohorts might look exactly the same, because in your day-to-day life, you earn 80,000 a year or 120,000 a year or 170,000 a year, whatever it is you earn, right? You earn what you maybe you've got person A and person B. Person A owns assets, person B doesn't. Maybe they both earn the same thing. They both live in the same home. They both drive the same car. But person A, knowing that they hold a bunch of index funds in their 401k, they have just a very different attitude and outlook towards life than person B, who has not participated in the upside and is just seeing prices continue to climb and is worried about how they're going to continue to keep up. So it's a bit of a tangent,
Hmm.
because I know your question was about me and not about the like broader economic reality.
Yeah.
But I think that my own experience is a microcosm of that. I think that that quiet confidence that I described, does it affect my day-to-day life? No, it doesn't. Um, I still order, misshapen groceries, like that ugly produce,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Yeah, so I still order ugly produce. Um, I still, most days I'm like wearing a, you know, sweatshirt and some sweatpants from Quince. Um, yeah, it doesn't really affect my daily life. Like, but I know that I've got those assets,
Yeah.
and I think that makes a difference.
And the reason why it's nice to hear your story is because, like you said, you're a representation of the humans because you are a human. And this is a universal experience that we all have when it comes to money and do I have enough? And what I hear you really hitting on here is security. Um, am I going to be okay? It's one of the basic psychological needs that as humans we have is like, am I going to be okay? And it's my mind's going back to um your father's desire for you becoming an accountant or doctor or whomever
Mhm.
wants that, because he's not the only one. It's around, are my kids going to be okay? And as you
Right.
proved, there's new ways to do it. But I think going back to your point that financial assets give us permission to feel okay. And I wonder for
Yeah.
yourself, does it also give you permission to be more of yourself? I know you did a talk, I think it was in FinCon, about radical authenticity.
Yeah.
Does it allow you to lean more into Paula's radical authenticity? I don't even know what the talk was about because I wasn't there, but the title is helping me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that talk was about, the talk was about creating online content, and
Hmm.
my thesis was, um, that many people say, "Oh, survey your audience, find out what they want you to talk about, and then talk about that." But my thesis was, if you do that, then you're not leading, you're following.
Mm.
And if I had done that at that time, everyone wanted me to talk about rental properties. They wanted me to talk about Airbnb, and my brand would have slowly become just that.
Mm.
It was I was already kind of at that time in 2017. I was already swimming upstream to not be seen solely as a real estate brand. Um, but all of the inbound that I was getting, um, most inbound related to that topic. Um, and so if I had followed the traditional advice of, like, find out what your audience wants to hear about and give them more of that, um, which I get from, like, a marketing perspective, but again, that's not leadership, and that's not, leadership is having a vision
Hmm.
and then moving relentlessly in the direction of that vision. And my vision was, for Afford Anything to always be something bigger. And the 5 pillars really exemplify it, right? Financial psychology, which is money mindset, um, increasing your income, because that is so critical. Like, there are a lot of people who don't have a spending problem, they have an income problem. And
Hmm.
unless that income problem is solved, they're never going to get anywhere, because, the delta, you can't shrink your way to greatness, right? And ultimately, if you want to increase the delta between what you earn and what you spend, once you've picked the low-hanging fruit of spending, the way to increase that delta is by focusing on the earnings component. So you take the, financial independence, increasing your income, and then investing, right? And you think about financial independence, retire early, how in the traditional FIRE acronym, financial independence, I think, is very valuable, and retire early is optional. I think the same thing about my own, 5 pillars acronym, right? The FII, financial psychology, increasing your income, investing. Those 3 are critical, and those 3 are foundational, and everyone needs to do those 3 things. And then the R and E, those are optional. Real estate, entrepreneurship. They're nice. They're nice to haves, but they're optional. You can live a good life without them.
Hmm.
So, just like in the FIRE acronym, financial independence is critical, but retire early is optional. Same thing with double I FIRE. FII is critical, RE optional.
Mm.
And so that was why I never wanted Afford Anything to be quote unquote, just a real estate brand, because I didn't want to build a brand based around something that I fundamentally see as optional. It's beneficial, but it's optional.
Mm.
Um, and like, Afford Anything was always meant to be more than that. So to me, that was what radical authenticity meant is, don't lean into the, survey your audience and give them more of what they want, because what is that famous Henry Ford quote? Like, if I'd asked them what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse,
Yeah.
you know?
Thank you for telling that story, because I'm assuming it could have been tempting to want to answer those questions about real estate because, hey, it's going to grow my brand. I can grow this brand, and if we had this scarcity mindset that I got to make money,
Mm,
but perhaps it's that security that you had that allowed you to stay true to that brand and be the leader that you are, because um, as you've said, you can't Scrooge your way into freedom, and you're doing that same thing.
right, right. I mean, I think it's partially that. I think also it's thinking in decades and not in quarters.
Mm.
Because sure, if I was focused on quarterly revenue, then yeah, squeeze the juice out of the lemon for the
Hmm.
quarter. But I was never thinking in terms of quarterly revenue. I was thinking in terms of, how do I make Afford Anything, um, a major brand that will sustain for decades to come, right? Because this goes back to, and it goes back to the notion of calling. I believe that if a person finds their calling, then they want to do that calling forever. You look at
Mm.
Betty White. Betty White was, she passed away at the age of 99. She was she was working right up until the day she died, clearly because she wanted to. She looked like she was having a great time. You look at Warren Buffett, he, at the
Yeah.
age of 94, just announced his retirement. And in fact, I read his letter to shareholders when he announced his retirement. And, he was like, well, I'm 94 and my kids are in their early 70s. And I think they need me right now. I think I want to spend more time with them, you know? um, And so, like, you've got Warren Buffett's not working because he has to. Like,
Right.
he's working because he loves it. Taylor
Uh-huh.
Swift, she's not
Uh-huh.
writing songs because she has to put groceries in the fridge. She's doing it because it's a calling. And so, anyway, all of that is to say that when you are in the work that you see as the thing that you want to do until you're 99 years old, then naturally you're going to think in decades.
Mm. It really helps expand our perception of time when you find this calling. And I'm curious, like I do feel like people can bring callings to their work without having to drastically uproot everything and take risk. And what I mean by that is if someone in a current work enjoys dealing with people, or I'm making things up right now, perhaps you can find more ways to integrate um relationships or bringing your ideas into the work. Often, yes, you want to might want to find a work, but I think we can find more calling in our work.
Mhm.
And when we find that purpose, as you're saying, it feels good, makes work exciting.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, speaking of time, all good things must come to an end. Thank you for this. I have a couple questions left for you here. If you could go back to that 20 some year old who resigned from your journalist job, about to board a flight to Egypt, what do you think she would say if she had the perspective to know what you've accomplished up to today? What do you think she would say to you?
Wear more sunscreen.
Wear
Yeah.
more sunscreen.
Wear more sunscreen, I think. I guess that's what I would say to her.
Have you heard
But
that song?
no, is that a song?
It's more of a spoken song. It's fantastic. It's like a life advice, and it's called "Wear More Sunscreen."
Oh,
And it
wow.
talks about living in New York City till you get hard, live in California till you get too soft,
Wow.
before
No, I
you get
haven't
too
heard
soft.
this.
Yeah. Okay. I thought you were quoting the song.
No, no, I had
I'll
no
send it to
idea.
you.
Wow. No, I was just thinking she's about to board a flight to Egypt. It's really sunny there.
Yeah. No, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah,
what would she
yeah.
say
Okay.
knowing your life that you've lived?
What would she say if she knew
It
how the
all
story
unfolded.
yeah, how the story unfolded? Um, Man, I don't know what I think she'd just be shocked.
Mm,
Um, I don't know if she would have the perspective to know what to say. Yeah, I think
yeah.
she would just be shocked.
Should be shocked. Well,
Yeah.
it's probably a good thing. If you were writing a book about like a memoir, what do you think you would title the next chapter of your career, of your life?
Probably I would call it the teamwork chapter because where I'm looking to grow with Afford Anything, we have operated with such a small team. We have a team of 6 core people right now, 3 of which are full-time. The other 3 are, like, heavy, but part-time, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and it's enough to keep us where we are, but it's not enough to grow. And so in order to grow, we need to build out the team. And so my major focus, across this year, across next year, is building out a much bigger team, and that requires it's a brand new skill set because, knowing how to hire, um, knowing how to find the right people and knowing how to outline roles, scope work, create, uh, articulate desired outcomes, create a scorecard, um, you know, measure output. Like that is such a different skill set
Uh-huh.
than being a newspaper reporter, which is how this all started, you
Yeah.
know? Like,
How things
so
change, hey?
yeah, exactly, exactly. So yeah, that's my major focus. So I think I'm moving into the teamwork chapter.
Teamwork. Excellent.
Yeah.
And what is happiness to Paula?
I think at its core, it is a deep feeling of contentment, a deep feeling that like this is this the if I died today and I I'd be bummed that like this story doesn't get to continue for a few more decades, but like I'd be pretty happy with where the story has gone up to this point.
That is a good feeling.
Yeah.
My last question that I've asked everyone, over 300 people, is let's imagine you're at that point. It's end of life. You find yourself sitting on a front porch, looking out at a view that gives you complete peace, ease, and a feeling of content. You
Mm.
decide to bring out a notebook to write one last article on what you found was a key to living a meaningful life. What would be the message?
That you need to balance prioritizing relationships with not letting yourself get lost in them, meaning not letting other people's ideas of who you should be override who you really are. So you need to simultaneously value having close relationships while also maintaining a firm and grounded sense of self.
Hmm.
Um, and surround yourself with animals.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Turtles
Turtles.
and cats.
Yeah, turtles and dogs and cats and,
Yeah.
you know, um, yeah, yeah. Surround yourself with animals
Paula,
in
I love
addition to
that.
people. Yeah.
Be yourself, surround yourself with people and animals. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciated this conversation. Um, for listeners, check out your podcast, your book. What else would you like them to go see?
Oh, so we have a newsletter. It's free, affordanything.com/newsletter. As my buddy Joe says, it's totally free and worth every penny.
There you go.
So
Might as
yeah,
well.
affordanything.com/newsletter. We send every Monday. I send three things, three thoughts, three takes, three ideas, three things worth knowing. So, um, and then and then in addition to Mondays, we send other stuff every sometimes.
Well, we will include all of that. And thank you. I've been enjoying hearing your voice for the past number of years listening to your podcast. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode with Paula Pant. That was such a pleasure to talk to her. I've listened to so many of her conversations, and I enjoyed hearing her story as she unraveled parts of the nuanced sections, which I think are really important when we look at our money stories. I also appreciated her perspective on freedom and what is enough. So the question that I have based on today's conversation is, how are you and me, how are we spending our time, energy, and money? Because sometimes it's not the answers we learn from, but the questions. If you've been enjoying the You Potential podcast, please leave us a review and subscribe here on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Take care, and we'll talk to you next week.